I've got a hot tip for all you Moon Boys out there. Team Moon Boys are going to be excited about this video here today, because I'm going to talk about the next big genre of comic book to take us all to the moon. A little birdie told me about this type of comic book. In fact, now that I think about it, two birdies told me about that. Actually, seven birdies? 8 birdies? A whole flock of birdies have been telling me about this genre of comic book taking us to the moon. And of course, we're talking about DC Bronze Age horror, ladies and gentlemen. DC Bronze Age horror. Swaggle dude, you don't understand. I've been going to all these comic book shows, and everybody is asking about DC Bronze Age horror. Swaggle you don't understand. I've been selling at all these shows, and everyone's coming up to me asking me, dude, do you have any House of Mystery bins? Do you have any House of Secret bins? Dude, Swaggle you don't understand. DC Bronze Age horror in high grade is going to take us to the moon. It's the only type of book that the comic book businessman cares about. And so in this video, we need to talk, finally, about DC Bronze Age horror. I've been wanting to address this for quite a bit of time. Here we are, coming up on Halloween, and it feels like the mood is right, things are simmering, and people are starting to get excited about this genre of book. But the question we have to ask ourselves is DC Bronze Age horror really going to take us to the moon? Well, in this video, I'm going to answer it. But I'm going to do you a favor, because this video might be kind of a long one. We're going to get really in-depth here. We're going to explore all the facets of it. And if you just want to know the answer and you don't have the patience, I'm going to say that can it take you to the moon? Yes, but no, but maybe. It really just depends. And in this video, we're going to talk about it. But of course, before I get into it, if you guys could like, comment, subscribe, I would appreciate it. Help support the channel. And hey, if you really want to help support the channel and you like your DC Bronze Age horror, you can always pick up a copy of Sanity, issue number 1. That kind of has your horror vibes right there. I mean, all the variant covers are sold out, the ones that kind of have the Bronze Age horror feel. But hey, on the interior pages, you might be kind of excited with this book. So head on over to swagglehousecomics.com, pick up a copy of Sanity. Help support me so that I can spend time doing all of this research about these types of books and actually pay my mortgage. That would be nice. All right, let's get into this video here today. House of Mystery number 174. Classic Joe Orlando cover. The first issue of the turnover to the House of Mystery format. Now, Swaggle, you're wondering, what is DC Bronze Age horror? What are you talking about? Well, comic book collector out there, we have to talk about this because, as you guys know, during the Golden Age, there was an explosion of pre-code horror books right before the Comics Code came out. We had all these great horror comic books, the EC titles, Chamber of Chills, things like that everyone really enjoyed at the time. Then we had the Comics Code come in. A bunch of Karens didn't like their children reading those books. They burned them all. We established the code. And for about 15 years, we basically had no horror stories. Then around 1968, the late 60s, early 70s, creators started to push back on the Comics Code, and then eventually DC would roll out a bunch of series and titles that were all horror-related: House of Mystery, House of Secrets, Unexpected, Ghost, all these types of titles that would be sort of an homage and a picking up of the baton of where all these pre-code horror books actually left off. And now a lot of people are thinking, well, hey, pre-code horror has gotten out of hand, right? Like, all those books are so expensive now. And DC Bronze Age horror has some of the most amazing covers in those runs. Ipso facto, DC Bronze Age horror, like pre-code horror, will be the next books to pop because actually the censuses are kind of low. That at least is the working theory. And while that does make sense, and I do think that there are certain books within DC Bronze Age horror that actually will be, keys that, comic book collectors will start to appreciate and will become more known within the comic collecting circles, and then eventually become, the books that people heavily target. I think that we can chew bubblegum and walk at the same time, right, boys and girls? We can actually talk about what this whole movement is, whether or not people are going to get rich from it, and actually have an intellectual conversation about it. Yes, is the census, especially in the high grade, for DC Bronze Age horror, very low? Of course, that is absolutely true. But is it also true that up until this point, nobody had any reason to send their books in to be graded? If you had DC Bronze Age horror, it was worth nothing. These books sat in dollar bins forever. Nobody cared about them, so you had no reason to send them in. So we know there are lots of people out there that have boxes and boxes of these books. Swag, you don't understand. They've all been in dollar bins and nothing is in high grade. Okay, I'm sure that most of them are not in high grade, but even if there are only a few 9.8s keeping the supply side of the supply and demand equation down, well, if there's no demand for these books, then what are you going to do? They're never going to go up in value. Now, let me caveat here a little bit. Okay, I know the dislikes are coming in here. I know there's a bunch of people that are sitting on boxes of these books ready to flip their way to the moon, and they're not happy that I'm making this video right now, but let me extend an olive branch to them because I do actually think there's a ton of books that can make a good return on your investment, or you can make a good flip on them if you can find them in the wild and buy them at the right price. I absolutely think that could be the case, but I think there's very, very specific books that we need to have our eyes on. So in this video, I want to go through all of the series and talk about some of the keys that I've identified and maybe talk about some of the elements that we need to educate ourselves on so that we are best prepared if you're somebody out there that wants to play in this market. So let's kind of pull up this book right here, House of Mystery number 174. Now, as we dig into the census here, we can see that there's 222 universal copies, 233 total graded. I mean, that doesn't seem like a lot, right? I mean, that is genuinely golden age numbers right there. But that doesn't mean that there can't be a ton of books that are out there sitting in the wild, in raw form. Now, this is a 1968 book. So the chances that there are 9/8s, a ton of them, like 1,000, is probably pretty low. I mean, if you take any random heavily printed Silver Age book that came out in 1968, I don't know, first appearance of, say, Vision or something like that, how many are actually going to be in the 9/8 level? Still not a lot. So do I believe that this book is, in 9/8 grades all over the place? No, absolutely not. Is there going to be some value for this book? Yeah, absolutely. But that doesn't mean that this is going to be a book that, hey, if I buy it graded now, 5 years from now, I'm going to be able to flip it for 10x because, again, these books are still very niche and the demand side is just not there. I mean, if we look at the 9.6 level here, this is something that I want to show you guys that I felt like was pretty concerning. I mean, if you go all the way back to 2003, you can see a sold price for this book at $1,725. That is the most expensive this book has ever sold for. And that was back in 2003. And all the way to, current year, we see a 9.6 sell for $1,200 back in 2017. Now, it's possible that here in the year 2023, things have tripled. It's very, very possible. But one thing that, I think is important to understand is that look at how volatile and flat this book has been from 2003 to 2017. I mean, 1,700, 1,300, 1,100, down to 827, back up to 1,490, and then most recently 1,200. And what that suggests to me is that it is a very niche book, and there's just not enough new holders of this book that are interested in picking it up. And if anything, the fact that the census is so low for this, where we only see a population of 11, I mean, who's to say that that person who bought this book in 2003, maybe at that time, this was the only 9.6, right? They may have said, oh my God, there's only 196, there's no 9.8s. This is the top of census book, and they bought it for that price. And then they realized that over the years, not to say that there's been a lot of people that have sent it in, but, 10 more copies popped up. And that's really one of the dangers with, these types of books is, if you go in there and you're skimming through all of the amazing House of Mystery covers and you think to yourself, oh man, there's only 198 on the census. Well, again, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be more 9/8s showing up. Like, I'm willing to buy that in any given book, there's maybe only 20 9/8s out there in the entire world. But even still, do you have 21 people that are willing to pay, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 for these particular books. If they're not keys, if they're not, celebrated covers, or they don't have some kind of history behind them, I just don't think you're going to have the demand there, especially when you start to get to that level of value where now you can actually just pick up a really nice PCH book, and then it kind of devoids the whole theory of moving on to that next best thing, which would be these DC Bronze Age horror books. But let's talk about some of the interesting books that I do feel like could be keys in this run. And, for my money, I think that there's really only two artists that I personally would focus on. A third one to a lesser extent, but we're going to talk about him in a second. I think the main artists to focus on are going to be Bernie Wrightson and Neal Adams. I mean, those two artists definitely have a huge following, and I think we have to stick to sort of the same ideas of, what makes a PCH book valuable is, okay, we're looking at the cover. Is there a damsel in distress, being scared? Is there a skull on it? Is it done by an artist that people actually really care about? And I'd say for, this subset of books, I think it's really Neal Adams and Bernie Wrightson that are the two artists that people should care about. So those are the books I think you should focus on until this market becomes, more mature and more well-known. I think Nick Cardy, you can make an argument that he does have a little bit of a following and he does have some amazing covers, but I wouldn't necessarily think that his following is enough to make his books valuable. And no disrespect to, Louis Dominguez, but I just don't think that he has the star power to make his books valuable out there in the market. But we have some books that are interesting to talk about. This one right here, House of Mystery number 175. This is the first appearance of Kane. Now, there actually is some DC lore in these books. They're not just anthology series telling scary stories. First appearance of Kane, I think, is always going to make this book a little bit desired, a little bit valuable, because he is a character within the DC universe. And this cover right here is in fact done by Neal Adams. So I do think that there is always going to be some value in this book right here. And you can see that people have spent some money on it. Back in 2011 at the 9.4 level, this was a $1,300 book. And what I really like to see is that here at the 8.5 level, you see it for $300, 7.0, $275, and even a 6.0 selling for $200. So not a tremendous amount of money, but still some value in there. If it was one of those things where a 9.8 sold for $1,000 and then you have like a 6.0 selling for $30, then to me, that's just somebody chasing a 9.8 and not really a book that, has value or is a key book all across all grades. The other book I think that is interesting to talk about is House of Mystery number 179. And what is the significance of this? Well, this is actually Bernie Wrightson's first interior artwork. And I think first artwork for artists is actually a huge deal, especially due to the fact that, with Bernie Wrightson, I mean, he made his name, doing a lot of the Swamp Thing stuff, does make this a very cool key for that reason, and would be one that I would say is probably for a while going to hold value out there in the market. 128 universal copies, no 9.8s, only 3 9.6s. Last sale back in 2011 for $2,600. So, again, is this book going to stay relatively flat? I mean, we've only had one sale, so it's really hard to tell. Or is this actually going to be one that trends up over time? 9.0 for $500 and then a 6.0 for $200. So again, some value here in the mid-grade, which I think is a good sign for a book like this one right here. Now, another book that is interesting right here is, again, House of Mystery number 236. You have a very cool cover done by Bernie Wrightson. I mean, tremendous line work on this one, high fidelity. You got the skull thing going on. And again, you have the cover artist that matters. And I think that when you dig into the numbers and you really start to evaluate some of these things, I mean, I think that's where you will see, okay, there is some demand for these books. The Bernie Wrightson covers definitely just are more in demand than that of the Dominguez ones. And if you dig into the numbers here, you can see 61 universal copies for this one, 9.4 selling for $600, 9.2 selling for $466, and then a 7.0, 187 in the last 90 days here. So again, that's one of the identifiers. I want to see that there is still some demand in the mid to low grade. That would make me feel a lot safer if I was someone who was going to buy a high grade of this book, like an actual slab of this thing. I mean, my personal opinion is that if you guys want to play in this market, you absolutely should be hunting these books out in the wild, and the real money to be made is by finding high-grade raws, sending them into B grading, and then just selling them, to people in the market that actually just want, a graded 9.8. I mean, that's really going to be the way that you go to the moon with these books. You're not going to go to the moon with this book by just buying it now and holding it for 10 years, as we established with House of Mystery 174. For all we know, these graphs could be extremely flat for decades. And the chances are that the longer that we are on the time horizon, the more that eventually these books will find themselves in the CGC census. And even if it's not a lot overall, it's still going to be enough numbers to keep the graphs pretty flat. Then you have House of Secrets number 81. This is when the House of Secrets format would turn over to the horror side of things. Again, another Neal Adams cover, and then a first appearance as well. First appearance of Abel right here, who again is another important character within the DC kind of horror mythos, a 1969 book. And I think that there is always going to be some demand and some value for this one right here because it has that first appearance. Then you have ones like this, which to me, I think that these are going to be the covers that are the most notable within this genre. I think that, if I was going to be a gambling man and speculate on which of the DC horror books are going to stand out, I think it's going to be the ones that have, the beautiful women on it, where a lot of the kind of kitschy stuff that has like a funny skeleton meme on it. I think that stuff is really going to be, the PCH side that will have value. I don't necessarily know if the House of Secrets kitschy stuff is going to be all that desired in the future, but I do think that covers like this that are done by Neal Adams that have this, beautiful line work, beautiful painted aesthetic, and beautiful like women on it. I actually think that a lot of these do have some potential, and this is going to be a really tough book to get in high grade, and one that I just felt like highlighting because I do think that it is kind of special. And you can actually see, 109 total graded, which means that, more people are inclined to slab this one just because of the artwork and the aesthetics. And you can see that, even at the A5 level, $241. So there is some value in some of the books. And again, you really have to put on your artist hat and really, really critique these covers to figure out, okay, what are the aesthetics that people are actually going to like? It's not going to be every cool cover that blows up in the market. Of course, what are the things that we like to talk about? Black covers, lots of great line work, beautiful women's skulls and things like that. And again, the artist, this one right here, House of Secrets number 100, a cover by Bernie Wrightson that I also think is going to have some demand out there in the market. All right, just because we're getting into it, let's talk about some of the other series here. Of course, there's another series called Unexpected. There's a lot of tremendous covers in these runs. It's just going to be really hard to figure out which of these is going to be a key in the future. And there are some books, like this one right here, Unexpected number 127. This is a cover done by Nick Carty. Now, I actually think that this is a really cool cover. I love like this kind of beautiful women right here, hovering over the swamp and things like that. And you can see that there's only 198 on the census. And this book sold 90 days ago for $2,160. But that, down here in the mid-grade, there's not much value here. And this is the thing that I think would be really careful, because you could see a sale like this, say, oh, there's only one sale, there's only 23 universal copies, it sold for $2,160. Man, this book is absolutely going to go to the moon. Is it really that surprising? This is a book that came out in 1971. There's just not going to be that many 9/8s at that level. If I pick a random 1971 book from Amazing Spider-Man right here, and I look at this one right here, ASM number 99, just kind of a regular Amazing Spider-Man book, not a specific key or anything, and I look at the 9/8s, even 9/8s here, there's only 28 on the census, and this one sold for $1,200. In fact, you can actually see that all the way back in 2014 was when this book had its peak price at $3,500 and then would correct over the years. And again, the reason for that would be that, at this time in 2014, maybe there were only 5 9/8s on the census. And if you were somebody who needed to have it, you had to pay for that price then. And then over the years, even though it's not that many at 28, more books on the census have pushed the price down. I think over the next decade, I think it's fair to say that maybe we'll get 5 books, over the course of its lifespan, at least, relative to this number right here. And then that would make you think, well, okay, does that 2160 number actually continue? Maybe it actually goes down. So again, you have to be really, really careful with picking out some of these books and thinking that you're going to go to the moon. And again, to me, I think that the play is always going to be buy raw books, see if you can find them for good deals, and then you can grade them and then let somebody else buy the book at the graded level. And then that's going to be the real way that you can make your money. That's going to be the real way that you go to the moon with this book, not necessarily buying, top of census and then holding it for 15 years. Again, another title right here, Weird Mystery Tales. I'm just showing you guys these titles so you can be familiar with them in case you're not. Witching Hour is another one right here. A lot of great ghost covers right here. You have a lot of great Secrets of Haunted House that are interesting. Another Bernie Wrightson cover that people like to talk about. And then you have this one right here. I think that this one is cool. I just wanted to point it out to you guys. Brave and the Bold, number 93. You actually have a crossover of Batman going to House of Mystery for the very first time. This right here is Neal Adams' cover. And I would say that this right here may be one of the best kind of speculation books to pick up because of the Batman factor. And then the last one's to sort of point out Secrets of the Sinister House, which I think is kind of a interesting series right here. I think that the one book in this run is probably going to be the most interesting. This one actually being a Nick Cardy cover, but again, because it has like the damsel in distress with the skeleton claw, I think that this one is kind of a fun one that might have some value in the future because of the history of having it, been turned over from these sort of forbidden love type of books and things like that. Another one that I think kind of has that mystery vibe and that painted aesthetic with, the blonde-haired damsel in distress, which, again, I think some of these books will have some value, will have some, demand out there in the market. But again, I don't necessarily know if all of them are going to take us to the moon. So let's kind of recap, this DC Bronze Age horror wave. I mean, I don't know about you guys. I've been feeling it a lot out there in the market, a lot of simmering, a lot of people talking about it, a lot of people, getting really, really excited about the potential. But we got to call it what it is. I mean, people are really, really excited about the potential because they're excited that, this could be a genre of book that gets massive FOMO and a lot of people end up jumping on it. And those people that have been stacking them will be very, very excited to sell into the hype and make a lot of money. I mean, you can absolutely make a good return on a lot of these books if all of a sudden there is a craze for them. But if you're somebody who is not a seller, this is where I think you have to be very, very careful. You got to be careful buying into this hype. And here's the deal. There will be a time when these books go crazy. Absolutely. All it takes is a few of these books in a 9.8 level to hit, say, a Heritage auction or a Comic Connect, and then one of them sells for 5 figures and goes absolutely bonkers to the moon. And then everyone on social media is going to post about it and say like, oh my God, this book sold for $10,000. And then you're going to see, me post a video with my face going, oh, like that with like some giant number on it. And then everyone's going to get all, caught up in the FOMO and get caught up in the hype. And then everyone's going to be chasing, these Bronze Age horror books. And that's when everyone is going to sell into the hype and sell into the market. But you have to be careful because once people realize that there's money here, then that's when all of the books get pulled out of the back stock and get sent to CGC. And then the inventory increases, the supply increases. So, again, what is my feeling about these books? Are they awesome covers? Is there some really, really cool stuff in there? Yeah, absolutely. I think the Bernie Wrightson stuff and the Neal Adams stuff is always going to have demand simply due to those artists having a following. And again, there's a lot of great covers by, Nick Cardy and Dominguez and stuff like that. That doesn't mean that they're not fun books to collect. They're absolutely fun books to collect. But are they going to, take us to the moon? I mean, it depends on what you buy it for. If you can find them out there in the wild, and you can find super high grade versions of it, then yeah, absolutely. You can flip them all day to people. But if you're somebody out there who gets swept up in the FOMO of it and you buy at the top and you buy it already graded at the 9.8 level, is it going to have the return on investment that you're hoping for? Well, that I am not so sure. Anyways, that's all I got for this video. That was me talking about DC Bronze Age horror. Here we are coming up on Halloween. I think that we're going to be starting to see a lot of these books getting posted around social media. A lot of sellers saying, I absolutely love these books. They're amazing. You should buy them. And all I'm saying is you got to be really careful. You got to be careful. You got to make sure you know what you're doing. And you got to do your research on which books you actually think are rare and are actually going to be good buys. Anyways, that's all right for this video. What do you guys think about DC Bronze Age horror? Are you collectors out there? Are you guys people interested in picking up some of these books? Let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. See you on the next one.